Welcome to KU Padasala. My name is Chad A. Haag. I am an author and former teacher from the United States of America, and I'm very excited today to have the opportunity to discuss with you the very important topic of German for reading knowledge. In this third lesson, we will move on to finally learning how to conjugate our first verb. Conjugation is adjusting the form of the verb to reflect things like, say, person, or number, or tense. And it's kind of an irony that the first verb we're going to learn how to conjugate within German is also the most difficult verb to conjugate, but it really cannot be any other way, for the first verb we have to learn is also the most important. That is the verb to be. Now, to be is the most irregular verb, not only in German, but also in English. You may have noticed that the infinitive form to be really does not look anything like its conjugated forms within the English language, in which you say not I be, or you be, or he be, but rather I am, you are, and he is. Well, even am, are, and is don't really look much like each other. So this is difficult to learn within English and within German, but once again is the place that we have to begin, because so much of our use of Western languages consists of doing things like, say, attributing adjectives to nouns. You want to say that the dog is fast, the dog is white, the dog is happy. Well, any one of those adjectives you need is. And that is why we really have to begin talking about sein. Now, das Sein is something we encountered just last lesson as one of those mysterious nouns talking about a verb, which provided the inspiration for famous German philosophers like Martin Heidegger and Georg Hegel to write countless volumes trying to understand what on earth sein, or being qua being, is. But we find that the mysterious noun being is just derived from the verb to be, which is really kind of the most commonly used one within the language. We find here that sein in the infinitive is, once again, quite different from its conjugated forms, which we will first learn in the present tense. Now, there really is no other way except to learn all of these through rote memorization, and over time, over the period of actually using them, for them to become second nature. So I'd like you to say all of the following with me. Ich bin, I am. Once again, ich bin, I am. Du bist, you are. Once again, du bist, you are. Now, we have to clarify that whereas in English there's only one word for you, regardless of context, in German you really do have three different yous. This is a you, which is a singular, rather than addressing a group of people. In American English you might say y'all, or you guys, or you all. So we're talking about just addressing one person, but this is also an informal context. Now, we don't really have the notion, in American English anyway, of a difference between a formal and an informal you, but some of the following examples might clarify this. You'll use the informal you when addressing somebody like a peer within school, your fellow classmates when you're in high school. Or you might use it when referring to somebody who is younger than you, like, say, addressing a small child. Or you might use it when referring to, or when addressing a pet. If you're saying hello to your dog or your cat, you'll call them du. A formal context is, for example, when addressing a police officer, or your boss at work, or your teacher. That is when you'll use the formal you, which we will learn in just a moment. But once again, repeat with me. Du bist is you are as informal you. Now, we have three different third-person singular forms in accord with the distinction between among the three genders within German: masculine, feminine, and neuter. These are ist, which is he is. Once again, say with me, ist is he is. Sie ist, which is she is. Here we have both words actually very similar to the English. Sie and she, and ist and is. Sie ist, once again, is she is. Es ist it is. Now, this is not only it in the English sense of referring to an inanimate object, because remember from our last lesson, something could be in the neuter gender even if it is literally biologically female, like das Mädchen, the little girl, still referred to as it or es because of grammatical gender being different sometimes from biological gender. So once again, say with me, es ist is it is. The plural forms are as follows. Wir sind is we are. We see that wir, which begins with a W, it's pronounced like a V, but it begins with a W. Wir sind looks a lot like and the word wir anyway, a lot like we, and sind kind of looks like sein. This looks more like sein than, say, ich bin or du bist, which really look more like the English word be. So we see there's a lot of different forms here. Once again, the only way we can learn them is through using them. So once again, say with me, wir sind is we are. Ihr seid is you are, but this is a plural you. This is addressing a group of people. Like in American English, you might say y'all or you guys or you all. This is the plural you. Ihr seid, you all are. Sie sind is they are, but wait a minute, there's another Sie sind on this slide. This is spelled the same with the exception of how large the first S is. We have the little s first as they are. But we have the big S as you are, but this is formal you. Once again, you're addressing a police officer or a judge in court or your boss at work, etc. You refer to you address them as Sie. So once again, Sie sind is they are with the little s, and Sie sind with the big S is you are, formal. So that was a lot, admittedly, to memorize. It would be better to now move on to some examples where we actually put this to use and have it become second nature. So the first example we will consider is the sentence, Ich bin der Professor. So we see a few things right away here. We notice that the definite article is der, which is masculine. Professor looks a lot like the English word professor. And ich bin is I, ich, and bin is am, or kind of like the English word be. So ich bin der Professor, I am the professor. But we can say some other things about me. We can say, for example, ich bin 14 Jahre alt. Ich bin, I am, 14 is 40. And Jahre alt sounds a lot like years old. Jahre, year, alt, old, all of these words really are the same, especially when you hear them spoken out loud. When you speak them out loud yourself, you will be amazed at how close they really are. The next one, ich bin gesund. Well, we know what Gesundheit is because in America, if somebody sneezes in the wintertime when they have the common cold, people will typically say Gesundheit, which even if they don't know that they're wishing the person good health, that's what they're doing in German. But we learned in the second lesson that heit is a suffix which is added to an adjective to make it into a noun. We now see that gesund is that adjective which is just healthy. So ich bin gesund is just I am healthy. So once again, say these with me. Ich bin der Professor. I am the professor. Ich bin 14 Jahre alt. I am 40 years old. Ich bin gesund. I am healthy. As could be predicted, there are other forms than just I, and there are other genders than just masculine. Here we find Du bist die Studentin. We remember that in suffix makes something feminine, and we remember that du is you, but do you remember specifically the singular you and the informal one? So I say Du bist die Studentin. I say you are the female student. I could say some other things about you, like your age. Du bist 18 Jahre alt. I remember Jahre alt. Jahre is years and alt is old. 18 is 8, 8, 10, 10. You are 18 years old. And I can also say some other things about you. Du bist jung und gesund. You are jung, well, that looks a lot like young. And gesund, we know, is healthy. So you could see why it is so necessary to learn sein first, despite the fact that it is so irregular in its forms. It allows us access to an uncountably large number of different adjectives. Now that I have the phrase du bist, I can say many, many things about you, just as I can say about any one of these persons within the table, because sein allows me to attribute adjectives to nouns or to pronouns. Du bist jung und gesund. So you can go ahead and speak with me one more time. Du bist die Studentin. You are the student. Du bist 18 Jahre alt. You are 18 years old. Du bist jung und gesund. You are young and healthy. Now let's refer to somebody who is in the third person, not you or I, but rather let's talk about somebody. Der Mann, remember that's the man? Der Mann ist der Arzt. So this is a new word. Arzt is a doctor. And we're saying that that man is the doctor. Okay, so it's not only adjectives, it's also nouns. You should think of sein as being like the equal sign within mathematics. If you have an equal sign within math, you can have expressions on either side that maybe look a little different from each other, but they refer to the same location on the number line. On one side I have the literal numeral 5. On the other side of the equal sign, I have the expression, in parentheses, 2 plus 3. 2 plus 3 and 5 actually do refer to the same thing. They're just different symbols. So too, der Mann and der Arzt, the man and the doctor, refer to the same person, and ist allows me to make that equation. I could say some other things about this man. Ist gesund, aber, that's but, aber der Patient ist krank. So the doctor's healthy, ist gesund, aber der Patient ist krank, but the patient is sick. And it's for this very reason that the patient has gone to see the doctor. What if there's a plurality of sick patients? Where do they go? They go to the hospital, or in German, more logically, the sick house. Die Patienten sind im Krankenhaus. Whereas in English, we have this very artificial word hospital. In German, they form much more logical words through building up these compounds from these smaller parts. Krank, we know, is sick. House is house. Krankenhaus is the sick house, or what we call the hospital. Sie sind nicht gesund. Sie sind krank. Here we have nicht as negation. They are sick because they are not healthy. Sie sind nicht gesund. Sie sind krank. So repeat with me once again. Der Mann ist der Arzt. The man is the doctor. Ist gesund, aber der Patient ist krank. He is healthy, but the patient is sick. Die Patienten sind im Krankenhaus. The patients are in the hospital. And sie sind nicht gesund. Sie sind krank. They are not healthy. They are sick. Let's go ahead and play a game now in which you will have to fill in the blanks on this screen with the properly conjugated form of sein. Remember, conjugation is adjusting the form of the verb to reflect things like person. Is it first person, second person, third person, as well as whether it is singular or plural. So I'll go ahead and read these for you, and you'll pause the tape after we go through these questions, and we'll compare answers on the next slide. Bist du krank? Nein, ich blank gesund. Ist krank? Nein, blank gesund. Sind wir krank? Nein, wir blank gesund. Seid ihr krank? Nein, wir blank gesund. Bin ich krank? Nein, du blank gesund. Sind Sie krank? Nein, Sie blank gesund. So pause the tape, fill in the correctly conjugated form of sein, and we will meet back in a moment to compare our answers. So the first question, bist du krank? I'm asking, are you sick? Informal, singular you. So since I'm asking you, your answer will be not du, because you're answering for yourself. It would be ich bin gesund. Okay, so the question and the answer have different forms because of the way that talking to somebody works. But if I ask you about somebody in the third person, you'll notice that the form does not change. Ist krank? Is he sick? Nein, ist gesund. Because we're both talking about that guy. In the third person, it is or ist in both cases. The third question. Sind wir krank? Nein, wir sind gesund. Are we sick? Well, we're answering about ourselves. No, we're healthy. Seid ihr krank? Are you all, as a group, sick? Nein, wir sind gesund. So it's ihr seid in the question, but it's wir sind in the answer because you're asking a group of people and they answer about themselves. Bin ich krank? Am I sick? I want confirmation from you. You answer about my status by saying, nein, du bist gesund. And finally, sind Sie krank? Nein, Sie sind gesund. Because we're talking about them in the third person, it's the same form in both cases. But of course, the present tense is not the only tense within German, and it's not the only one which we'll want to immediately be able to use. In addition to talking about what is the case now, we want to talk about what was the case in the past. But you'll notice, even just by doing that, I showed you that within English, the past tense of to be is even more irregular, perhaps, than the present tense, because here we have a W, which seems to be totally unrelated to either the infinitive or the present tense forms. Well, similarly in German, the infinitive sein changes in its past tense forms to words that begin with a W in a very similar way to what you would find within English. Just as you say, I was within English, you say ich war in German, and you say du warst as you were for the informal and singular you. For he, she, and it, we have war, sie war, and es war. We were is wir waren, ihr wart is you all were, Sie waren is they were with the little s, and Sie waren with the big S is you were formal. Now let's go through that whole thing one more time. You speak with me. Ich war, I was. Du warst, you were, informal and singular. War is he was. Sie war is she was. Es war is it was. Wir waren is we were. Ihr wart is you all were. Sie waren is they were, and Sie waren with the large S is you were formal. All right, now that we have both the present and the past tense forms of sein, let's play another game, but this one will also test you on something else you have learned, which is the grammatical notion of case and the definite article. You will need to determine, when examining these blanks, whether you need to insert a conjugated form of sein, and the tense, by the way, is indicated for you, or whether you need to insert the definite article adjusted for gender. So we'll do the first sentence together as an example of this. Blink man, blink gesund in the present tense. Well, this is the man is healthy. So because it's a man, it's masculine. Der Mann ist gesund. So go ahead and complete the rest on your own, and we'll meet back after going through these to compare answers. Du blank krank past tense. Blank Frau blank krank present tense. Wie blank gesund past tense. Blank Mädchen blank nicht gesund present tense. Blank Mann blank nicht gesund past tense. Blank Patientin blank krank present tense. Ihr blank nicht krank past tense. Go ahead and pause the tape. We'll meet back in a moment. Okay, so the second example, since we already completed the last slide, is du warst krank. We know this because it's past tense. Next we have die Frau ist krank, present tense and also feminine noun. Wir waren gesund. This is the past tense. Das Mädchen ist nicht gesund. This is present tense, but remember, Mädchen is a little girl, but grammatically neuter because it has that diminutive suffix chen. Der Mann war nicht gesund. This is past tense and also Mann is masculine. Die Patienten sind krank. This is present tense, and Patientin is a plurality of patients. That en ending is kind of like in English words children or oxen or brethren. That tells you it's plural. And finally, ihr wart nicht krank. This is the past tense. Now, as we're learning a new language, it's very important to be able to ask questions, and the way that we do this is with the so-called interrogative words. These are words which we know in English, like who, how, why, when, etc. We'll go ahead and learn some of these within German right now. I want you to say with me, wann is when, warum is why, was is what, wer is who, wie is how, wie viele is how many, but be careful, those are two different words. Wie viel as one word is how much. Wo is where. Wohin is where to. Woher is where to, where from, excuse me. And was für ein is a collection of words meaning what kind of. So let's say those together once again. Wann is when. Warum is why. Was is what. Wer is who. Wie is how. Wie viele, with the space between the two words, is how many. Wie viel as one word is how much. Wo is where. Wohin is where to. Woher is where from, and was für ein is what kind of. Well, now that we have interrogatives, we can begin forming questions, but we really need to talk now about German word order in order to do so. So far, we have assumed that the word order of very simple German sentences is that the subject of the verb comes at the very beginning of the sentence and followed by the conjugated verb, followed by whatever other elements, if we're attributing an adjective or etc. to them, that'll come at the end. But with interrogatives, we have another kind of word we haven't dealt with before, and we're not sure where to place it. Well, just as would be the case in English, you put the interrogatives at the beginning of the sentence, but because that displaces the subject of the verb, we're left wondering where it will go from here. Now, just as is the case in English, the conjugated verb will remain in that second position within the sentence, even after this happens, moving the subject to the position afterwards, and this gives us our first very, very basic rule for German word order, which is that the conjugated verb will typically remain in the second position of the sentence. If we have a very simple question like wo ist die Universität? Where is the university? Within English also, we find the interrogative word where, wo, at the beginning, the conjugated verb is or ist in the second position, and then the subject, die Universität, or the university at the end. So too, we can ask, where are you going, formally? Wohin gehen Sie? Gehen is in the second position. If we ask, though, wie viel kostet das Buch, whereas in English we would require another word does to occupy that second position, how much does the book cost? In German, that is unnecessary because if you really examine the usage of the word do in that context, it doesn't really mean anything. It's rather fulfilling a certain placeholder for that second position verb, which we realize in English has to be filled by something, even what is called by linguists the dummy do. But in German, that's all unnecessary. You can simply have the inversion, wie viel kostet das Buch? So once again, say with me, wo ist die Universität? Where is the university? Wohin gehen Sie? Where are you going to? And wie viel kostet das Buch? How much does the book cost? But now that we have some interrogatives, we can begin asking each other questions like what our names are. So the way that you would ask, what is your name in German, typically would be with the verb heißen. Now, heißen is not exactly easy to translate into English because we use an idiomatic phrase, my name is, which really does not make any reference to I as the subject of anything. Rather, the name is the subject of the conjugated verb is in English, but in German, more actively, it is I who am doing the action, and it's just generally ich heiße followed by my name. Ich heiße Chad. So once again, this cannot really be translated literally because I basically call myself Chad is how you might try to think of it. So if I ask you what your name is, I might ask, wie heißt du? Or how do you call yourself? I can technically also say, wie ist dein Name? In which I do make explicit reference to the name in much the same way it would in English. It's just much more common to use heißen. Similarly, if I adjust this for formal rather than informal context, I would say, wie heißen Sie? And wie ist Ihr Name? If I respond to this, once again, I say, ich heiße Chad, but of course, you will say ich heiße with your name instead. If I want to say some of the things about me, we were first meeting each other, I might say ich bin, and I can tell you what I do. Well, I'm maybe a student on a college campus. Ich bin Student, or maybe a feminine, ich bin Studentin. So once again, repeat with me. Wie heißt du? What's your name? Informal. Wie ist dein Name? This is also what's your name? Informal. Wie heißen Sie? What's your name? Formal. Wie ist Ihr Name? What is your name? Formal. Ich heiße, my name is. Ich bin, we already know I am. And for an example, ich bin Student or ich bin Studentin. I am a student, whether male or female. Another question which you might get if you're traveling abroad is, where are you from? Now, as an American living overseas, it's a question you get fairly often. I mean, where did you come from is what they're really asking. Even if it's shortened in English to where are you from. In German, it's rather where are you coming from, with explicit reference to the verb kommen. The question, woher kommst du, is answered also with explicit reference to the verb kommen, as ich komme aus, aus means out of, with the country where you're from. Now, for me as an American, this is ich komme aus Amerika. But maybe if you're from India, this would be ich komme aus Indien. So once again, you say with me, woher kommst du? Where are you coming from? Ich komme aus Amerika. I come from America. Ich komme aus Indien. I come from India. Finally, we'll finish with a few other politenesses or useful questions you might have, especially if you're meeting someone for the first time. You might ask who somebody is. Well, we know that who is the interrogative wer. We know that is ist, very similar to the English word is. Well, what about that? Well, we know that the neuter definite article is das. And you might be surprised to know that in this context, if we want to ask who is that, we would just fall back on that neuter noun as something like a word for it. Well, the question, who is that, is asked once again in German, wer ist das? If you want to be introduced, the verb for introduction is vorstellen. if you meet somebody and tell them that it's a pleasure to meet them, you would say, es freut mich, dich kennenzulernen. Now that might sound like a mouthful, but if you look closely at kennenzulernen, it's really a couple different words there. Lernen, of course, is learning. Zu is the preposition to. And kennen is knowing in the sense of acquaintance. Now, this is something which has kind of fallen out of use within English, but in other languages, like, say, French and Italian, you still have a distinction between, in French, savoir and connaître. You have the kind of knowledge which you know maybe scientifically, and it's not a coincidence that that sort of knowledge in German, Wissen, becomes literally science and Wissenschaft. But the other kind of knowing you have, which is acquaintance. I know my neighbors. I know the shopkeeper down the road. And I know my cousins back in America. That's a different knowing, which in German is kennen. So when you're first meeting somebody, you're learning to know them in that way. That's why it's kennenzulernen. And if it's a pleasure, then you say es freut mich. Freut is basically referring to some sort of pleasure, and es, we already know, is it. Mich is me. So es freut mich, dich kennenzulernen is it's a pleasure to me to learn to know you. Finally, if this is formal rather than informal, we will adjust dich to sie and change this to es freut mich, sie kennenzulernen. So once again, we have the distinction es freut mich, dich kennenzulernen for informal and es freut mich, sie kennenzulernen for formal. And this will complete this lesson. I look forward to moving on to the next one.